Hey, it's Mike from Michigan here. I'm going to start on my third Cultipacker video. Going to try and do a 3-point Cultipacker this time so I can lift it up with the tractor and get into some tight spaces. Hopefully that works out good. If you haven't seen my first two videos, I recommend you watch those first. I go into a lot more detail in those. Anyway, as always, the first thing you need is some Cultipacker wheels to start with. I have some 15-inch ones this time. It's got a 2-inch bore in it, so I'll get an 1 7/8" axle, and I have 19 of them. So I'm going to make a 6-foot wide 3-point lift Cultipacker. This is what most Cultipackers are made out of for the frame. This is 2-inch by 2-inch by 1/4-inch angle iron. Because I decided to make a 3-point and it's going to be lifted by the middle, I thought I should go with something a little heavier than this. So I went down to the scrap yard and walked around there for a couple hours to see what I could find. This is what I ended up finding at the scrap yard. This is 4 inches by 3 inches, and it's also 3/8 inch thick instead of a 1/4. You can see compared to the 2x2 that it's a much larger piece of metal. It weighs about 50 pounds a piece. I got 2 of these for the frame. To help beef up the end pieces, I had some 12-inch channel cut 4 inches wide, and I'm going to use this for the support brace. I'm going to put the angle iron right around here and bolt it right into this. Then as a spacer to push that bearing out farther from the frame, I've got some 2.5-inch by 2.5-inch tubing. I'm going to cut this off in pieces and put this inside the channel, and then the bearing will mount onto this. So to mark this to the right size to cut it, I found a couple pieces of scrap wood that are the same thickness as this. Put those right here. And I'll line that up just like that. And I'll mark it. Then I'll cut those right on the outside of the lines there, and then I'll hit them with a grinder to get more of an exact fit, so I can put that right in here. I'm going to put 2 of them in here, and that should give me enough space when I put my bearing on top of that so it doesn't hit the frame. Got it cut. Doesn't look too bad. Fits in there close, not quite to the bottom. I'll nip the bottom corners off with a grinder, and then it should fit in there nice and tight. Took about a 1/16 off the bottom of each side here, and then that'll fit in there nice tight fit right to the bottom. Be able to bolt that right in there and really make a good strong end out of it. One thing I found that works really well is once I start drilling holes larger than a 1/2 inch, I use a bimetal hole saw. It saves me the trouble of changing bits out, and it makes one nice smooth hole. If you keep your speed good and keep it cool, you can get a lot of cuts out of one of them, and they're not that bad. $7-8 you can get just the size you need. we go, 5/8 hole. I've got all the metal for the end pieces cut and drilled, and I've got the one on the left put together with the bolts through, just so you can get an idea what it's going to look like when it's done. Got some straight bar 3/8. I cut them off 8 inches long. I'm going to use these for the top, for the third point, and I can hook my top of my 3-point hitch right in between these. Okay, I'm starting to work on the top link. I've already got the hole drilled in the top. I'm working on the 2 bolt holes. What works really well for me to make sure everything lines up is I took 2 vice grips and I just clamped it together. I made sure this hole lined up. I put a 1-inch bolt in there, and then I'm going to finish drilling the bottom 2 holes to connect it now. Some people are really good at measuring the holes on the top piece and the side piece and then transferring that measurement over to the second piece that they're going to drill in. However, I'm not one of those people. That never seems to really work well for me. What I found works good for me is I'll spend a couple minutes and get everything squared up and clamp it into place, and then I'll take one of my old hole saws and I'll slide the guide in until it's just about flush. Mark each hole just like that. And then if you can see there, got a nice round circle there with a dot right in the middle, so I know right where to put it on the drill press. And then I get a hole that lines up exactly with my other piece here, and everything seems to work good. Okay, I got all the holes drilled. I squared it back up and clamped it together to make sure everything's going to line up all right. Next, what I'm going to do is I'm going to lay this right in here for a guide, and I'm going to drill a hole right here and a hole right here on both sides and put 2 more bolts in there, and that'll be what I have to hold the end pieces together. Okay, I've got all the holes drilled for the end pieces. I always like to put all the bolts in just to make sure everything's going to line up before I move on to the next step. On the other side here, I've got one that almost fits, but it's not quite good. What works really well is to just take the drill and run her through there and clean it out a little bit. And then we're in business. Alright, I've got the pieces cut for the crossbar here. This is what the lower arms of the 3-point hinge is going to hook to. My first thought was that I'd put a hole in here and then I'd buy a pin from Tractor Supply or somewhere and run it out here so my lower arm could slide over that pin and hook up. But then I thought I've already got the angle iron, so I'll just cut a couple more pieces and I'll just mount them like that, and then I'll just cut holes in here, and then I'll have that lower arm go right in between and run the pin through that way. Not only is that cheaper for me because I already have the angle iron, but now I'll have 2 bolts holding it here and 2 here 6 inches apart, and it'll give me a second cross brace in here to make it even stronger than it was before. For a category 1 hitch, the inside diameter for the bottom arms is 26 inches. So what I did is I found the exact center of my angle iron. I made a line right there, and then I measured off 13 inches off each side. I don't know if that line's going to show up or not. and then I clamp that piece in for a 13-inch, and then I'm going to drill that center with my hole saw all the way through, and that'll give me a nice pilot hole, so when I flip that angle iron over and put it on the drill press, I'll know exactly where each hole's got to go. Okay, well, I still have the first one clamped in place. I'm going to go ahead and measure 3.5 inches outside to outside here, and then I'll make sure that's square. And once it's in place, I'll take the clamps off this one and clamp this one in, and we'll get those holes drilled. These clamps off. Got our holes all lined up, and then I'll flip these over, put them on the drill press, and cut the holes through all the way with the hole saw. Going to start working on the holes for the lower arm pins for the 3-point hitch. Category 1, that's a 7/8 diameter hole. What I did is I measured 1.5 inches down and 1.5 inches in. That way I'll have at least 1 inch of steel on the top and 1 inch of steel on the front for support. For the top link of the 3-point connection, I'm going to use this 2x2 tubing I have. For a category 1 hitch, it's got to be 18 inches tall, so I'm going to put that right over my center mark. Cut this piece to go right to the back, and this piece is cut for my support. I tried to come up with a few different ways to do this. I think what I'm going to end up doing is taking it to a welder, have them weld this part together, and then I'll put a bolt hole in here to mount it and a bolt hole here to mount it. I thought about putting a couple pieces of angle iron here and running pins through so I could take this on and off, but I think simpler is just going to be better. I'll bolt it in here, and then when I want to take the third arm off and put a tongue on, then I'll just use the same 2 bolt holes, and then I can pull it behind my tiller with the tongue and switch it back and forth, I don't anticipate switching it that often. I think 90% of the time I'll probably be pulling it behind my tiller, and that once a year when I do a food plot in the woods, then I'll just take the 2 bolts out and bolt this piece in and turn it into a 3-point. I got the top link back from the welder. He did a really nice job on it. Charged me $15. Money well spent. Even if I had my own welder, I sure couldn't make it look that nice. And for $15, I think I'm way ahead. I'll go ahead and center this where it needs to be. Mark my 2 holes here, and we'll get this put in place. Just put my piece on here. Drew a circle where the hole already was, so I knew where to drill this one. And I just drilled that one by hand with my cordless drill. Put my bolt in there. Get that lined up just right. Square it up good. I'll go ahead and put the clamp on this part right here to clamp it right into place. And once that's clamped right into place, I'm going to take my drill and just drill a hole right through both of them, and that way I'll know exactly where it needs to go on the back piece and everything will line up right. Measured out, found the center, snap it with my punch a couple times, put a drop of oil on it, and I'll go ahead and drill through both pieces, and that way everything will line up. There we go. And I got a nice hole right there, and I can put this in the drill press, and I can put that in the drill press, and everything should line up when I'm done. Okay, now that I've got the holes drilled in the top link, I'll go ahead and line them up on our welded piece here. You want to make sure you have enough room between the hole and the piece here, because when you raise it, that top link is going to hinge in there, and if you got this too close to your support brace, when it goes up all the way, your third link is going to hit that. So I'd give it at least a couple inches in there, and then I'll mark those holes, and I'll have my top pieces on just like that. What it's going to look like. Get the right size bolts in it. Okay, I have everything cut that needs to be cut and everything drilled that needs to be drilled. At this point I'll just completely assemble it and tighten everything up, make sure everything fits. Sometimes I have to run the drill through the holes just to get everything to work well. Once I do that, I'm going to completely disassemble it, and I'll go over each piece with a grinder, smooth all the rough edges, hit all the drill holes. And see, some of the holes are a little rough yet. Smooth everything off, and at that point we'll be ready for paint. And once it's painted, then we'll just put the axle on and the packer wheels, and we should be good to go. Now the fun part, I'm going to go over everything with the wire wheel to get it ready for painting. Go. Alright, got all the small pieces done. I'll get the angle iron next, and we'll be ready for some primer and some paint. Alright, we've got everything painted. We're ready to start putting it together. Remember the end piece, we ground that one edge off so it'll fit in there nice. Make sure you put that one on the top, face up. And then the second piece will go here. I'll grab some bolts and we'll start putting her together. This is the bearing I use. It's a pillow block bearing. The pillow block is the outside, the bearing is in the middle, and this is an adjustable bearing, which means the bearing can swivel inside the housing just a little bit. And I always use those for anything homemade. If you're not exactly square, the bearing will tilt a little bit and line up to wherever you're at, and that'll keep your bearing from burning out. And I also get the kind with a lock collar. You can see this bearing's got a little groove on the inside, and that lock collar goes right on there, and then it's got a set screw in it, and that tightens up on the axle shaft, and that keeps the axle from sliding out the end. I've got the axle right here, and this is such a tight fit for the bearing that just having that little bit of surface rust on there, there's no way I'm going to get that on there without really pounding on it, and I don't want to do that. So I'll get out my wheel with my wire brush, and we'll polish that end up, and then we'll start putting the packer wheels on. There we go. I lucked out on this find. I ended up with a couple good solid end pieces. Usually there's only 2 of those per packer, and those get pretty hard to find. Being on the ends, they're the first thing that hit a tree or a rock and break. So that's nice. It looks good and it helps keep the dirt out. Okay, I've got 19 15-inch packer wheels. We'll put the bearings on, and then we'll start connecting the frame. I always put the lock collar on first. That way if it comes loose and the axle starts to move, you don't lose the lock collar. Make sure that the set screw's loose, otherwise you'll be struggling with that. And then the edge on the bearing goes in the lock collar. There we go. I'll just tap the axle from the other side a little bit, give us a little more room. Here we go. Perfect. Now we'll leave all this loose until we get the frame on, because this may have to come in or out 1/4 inch. Okay, this is the part where you want to get your buddies to help you. The frame right now probably weighs 150 pounds. And there's probably at least 300 pounds on the axle here, and trying to wrestle it all together can be a little difficult sometimes. Put our pieces in. Get a nut on there just to hold it till we get the other one in. Well, nobody needed to hear the last 10 minutes. What's important is I got this side together, and hopefully the other side goes a little bit easier. It's kind of a struggle because you're going through 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 pieces of metal, and the bearing sitting on there pretty tight. So it's a lot of wiggling around and getting everything lined up, because that hole all the way through there is pretty precise. That's why I always put it together before I paint it, just to make sure everything's going to work. Alright, now it's starting to look like something. Next we'll start putting the support braces on the top. And once we get those lined up, we'll be able to tighten everything up. Okay, we got our pieces for the lower arm attachment. That hole up front. Somebody asked me if you'd be able to weld this instead of putting the bolts in, and I would say absolutely. I think probably 70% of my time after I get the materials is spent drilling the holes and making sure everything lines up. If you had a welder, you could weld all of this, and pretty much the only thing you would need to bolt in would be where the bearings go. It would probably be cheaper in the long run too, because you wouldn't have to spend the money on all the nuts and bolts and the drill bits and everything else. But I don't have a welder, so this is what I do. Okay, now I'm going to bolt my top connector on. If you notice, there's 4 bolt holes in the angle iron here, but there's only 2 in this. The reason I did that is I made a tongue that will hook on here also. I like to pull it behind my 6-foot tiller. That works out really well. And then I can switch it over to this if I get in the tight spots. If you're going to switch a lot, you could probably come up with some sort of system where it's pinned in instead of bolted in, and then it wouldn't take you so long to switch it back and forth. But I probably won't switch it that much, so I'll just bolt it in for now. Okay, I've got everything on finger tight. I'll go around just to make sure everything's square and everything's lined up where it needs to be. And then I'll go ahead and tighten the frame up. And then I'll go ahead and put the packer wheels together tight. And then I'll adjust that lock collar. You can see there's a little bit of play in them yet. And once I move that lock collar in, that'll keep them off the bearings too. Here's the tongue I made. It's just a 1x3. I got the holes in the end to hook up to the angle iron. And then a coupler on the front, clip on the back of the tiller. Alright, I got everything tightened up. I got it hooked on. By far the heaviest one I ever made. And estimating with the packer wheels on there, we're close to 650 or 700 pounds.